All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Everybody going good this afternoon?
Hi.
We get a wave from everybody.
Hi. Hi,
Good deal.
Jill.
Good deal.
Hi,
Well, welcome
Matt.
into a historic first for JYP, our first electronic meeting. Glad to be here. Glad to be a part of. We have a whole lot of folks signed up for this event. There's over 100 people should be on the call today. So that tells us the importance of this conversation, and super excited about our guest and about our conversation. My name is AJ Massey. I am part of the JYP Advisory Council. So I'm just here in that respect. I just want to say thank you for our sponsors for JYP, Gerdau, ATA, Alexander Thompson Arnold, Simmons Bank, Voya Financial Services, Steve and Brad Little, Personnel Placements, LLC, and Align. Big thanks to these sponsors. And I say this every time I do this, but remember, these are businesses that are interested in the success of young professionals in Jackson. So please give them your business, help support them, because they proactively have looked out for us and trying to get us to move on to the next steps and helping out Jackson as a whole. Of course, got to do the housekeeping items with one of these Zoom calls. So please make sure that mute your lines, keep, help out with the background noise. I suggest turn on speaker view so that you'll be able to see our guests, Phillip and Matt, throughout the presentation. So you'll be able to see who's speaking very quickly and easily. Also, please send your questions through the chat during our speakers talk, and we'll see if we can get those answered by the end of the event. Phillip has said he doesn't like to ignore questions, so don't be afraid to ask him something. He wants to talk about it, and he wants to address each issue that you guys have. So, and this is a safe space to do that. So please do that. So let me just first of all introduce our moderator for today's discussion, Matt Marshall. Matt is a great Jacksonian and a good friend. Matt serves as the president and CEO of United Way of West Tennessee. Before that, he spent 11 years in education, 8 of those in higher ed at his alma mater, Union University, where he did his undergraduate work in Christian ethics and then earned a master's degree in education. During his time at Union, Matt served as the director of Center for Racial Reconciliation and the director of Service and Diversity Initiatives. He's currently the chair of the Anti-Poverty Task Force for the City of Jackson, the chair of the Jackson-Madison County Equity Project, and a member of the United Way Worldwide Black CEO Alliance. He also serves as a young adult pastor at the historic First Baptist Church. He's a native Jacksonian and married to Rachel. They're the parents of Ariana, Honora, and Elias. So thank you, Matt, for being here. Excited to have you. Also excited to have Phillip Duventry, Jacksonian as well. This is the brother of Pierre, if you want me to say that, but I will. Phillip is in Los Angeles right now. He's talking to us from the West Coast, but he holds a master's degree in higher ed from higher ed administration from Florida International University in Miami, Florida. He's worked in higher ed and the study abroad programs for the last 10 years and has facilitated multiple diversity trainings, led national civil rights tours, and held diversity positions domestically as well as internationally. He's a proud local graduate of Northside High School, and we won't hold that against him, and was born in Memphis, Tennessee, and shares a birthday with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He thinks his upbringing in the South has had the biggest influence on his passion for diversity. So thank you so much for Matt and Phillip for being on today's call. And Matt, I'm going to sling it on over to you. Take off.
Thanks, AJ, for that introduction. And yeah, we joked yesterday during our training call that Phillip should have been a Cougar, but that's all right. We can't all be perfect. So that being said, Phillip, it is great to be on the call with you. Phillip and I go way back. Our families go way back. And so, we're almost practically like family. And so his sister Amber, his brother Pierre, we all grew up together, played across the street. They grew up across the street from my aunt and uncle. And so, as AJ said, even though Phillip now resides in LA, he's definitely a Jackson native. And so excited to be having this conversation with you, brother, to kind of talk through some of these issues and try to help our community out the best we can. And so let's jump straight into it because we got a lot to cover. And one of the first things that, you and I and Jill, when we first kind of sat down and brainstormed this, one of the things we kind of discussed was the importance of language, of terms. And so, we kind of, the first idea I think that we had was to kind of begin by defining some terms. So let's start with the term race itself. Audrey Smedley, who authored Race in North America, Origin and Evolution of a Worldview, has said that most contemporary scholars agree that the term or the word race was really a recent invention, and that it was essentially a folk idea. It wasn't really so much the product of research or discovery. Rather, again, it was just a creation. So, when we think about it along those terms, the sociological origin of it, what does the term race mean in our culture? And then the second question would be, is it equal to the term ethnicity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And first, I just like to say thanks for having me on here. It's an honor and a privilege. And I'm humbled to be on here with Matthew, CEO, first Black CEO in that position, and just to be invited by Jill and to get to meet AJ. I just appreciate this opportunity. And that's something I'm impressed already with what you're doing in Jackson, especially during this time. It makes me just proud to be from Jackson, Tennessee, and very proud still to be from Northside. And I have a lot of respect for JCM, Mary High, the Mary family, who's taught me a whole lot about race and my culture. And you have descendants of that Mary family out here presiding over SCLC and influential in the Black Lives Matter movement here in Los Angeles. So a lot of love for all of Jackson. And great question. What is race? And so that's a great question with which to start. And we know race is defined as a socially defined category that's based on physical differences between groups of people. And it's a socially constructed thing. So people say, well, it's not real, or it is. I get it, because it's socially constructed. It's like this meeting, we didn't meet together for real. Like, we weren't together. But this meeting is very real. We're just meeting virtually. Right. Race is kind of like that. Even though it has differences that we can see, physical differences that we have decided make up the race, is socially constructed, but it has real life consequences and impacts. And race also has to do with power. And a lot of people probably remember the famous classroom video that's been viral for a while that happened in the 60s, where she did the blue eyes versus the brown eyes, and to talk about, race and the power and dominant versus subordinate groups. And it's really about dominant, as more than 50% of the group belongs to that. And you also hold power or positions of power, usually meaning you have the position of power to influence certain things, policies.
Yeah, so would you say that that's kind of the key difference between that term race and ethnicity, is that focus on power and what that's meant historically?
Yeah, exactly. Because ethnicity, it can be intertwined, and even you may fill out a form that says race/ethnicity, and you may say, well, I look at Black as being both. And ethnicity, I guess simply put, is more of kind of the cultural. You have your ethnic grocery aisle. You may have an ethnic section. It's kind of culturally what people identify, and race is more of what we see. And it even goes into history, especially in the United States, in terms of race. Historically, when you had Irish or Italian immigrants, they were treated very differently, and they were discriminated, and they weren't allowed to own houses in certain areas. And eventually it ended where all the European descendants, it kind of this ideology that, well, we're going to consider ourselves white. And that really didn't happen until their descendants, until their children were born in America, because white was kind of that socially constructed. So the culture that was in America, so those children were now considered white. And so that kind of gave power within that group. And now you have white and you have the other. So you still have the indigenous people, Native American Indians, which we know usually are always the marginalized and oppressed group, even when they first got visitors, being us, and the Blacks. So it's like, okay, well, what about Blacks? You're not a monolith. You came from multiple countries, but in this country, we're considered Black, and all the European immigrants were white. And so a little different than ethnicity, because race has a lot to do with power.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point right there, really quick. That in what you just said, race stripped a lot of African Americans of their ethnicity.
Oh,
Because their culture, their whatever, whatever original African nation they would have been from or tribe, that was stripped when they came to the United States. And what replaced their ethnic background was this idea of race.
Yeah, so it's really like people told us who we were. And if you look at names, I think language matters, names matter, so important. And you're stripped of your names, you're stripped of your culture, and you're just, hey, you are now Black. And it's not that we don't have pride or proud to be identified as that, because it's kind of become like, okay, well, look at all you had to overcome. You were stripped of so much, and yet you're still able to prevail. So it's kind of been like a reclaiming thing now. So definitely something that had ill intentions initially, especially in America. It's been more of a reclaiming of it. You also see that with the word Indian versus Native American. A lot of different Native American group, indigenous people who were here first, have reclaimed kind of the term. Race is a tricky thing, and it's changing and evolving. And so we just have to be ready to adapt. If you want to look up more on that too, you can look into even critical race law or critical race theory, which is society and culture, and the difference between different groups of when it comes to race, power, and law. So how law is treated differently and what power dynamics exist.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So why then is color blindness not the ultimate objective? That's something we hear people talk about a lot. Particularly, our white brothers and sisters, they say, well, I don't need to see color. So why is that not the ultimate objective? If race is a socially constructed thing and to a large degree, why don't we all just want to be colorblind?
Yeah, I've heard this, and it's definitely very problematic. And it's doing the exact same thing that was rooted in the ill intentions of stripping someone of what they are. Even if you have well intentions now, well, I just want to see everybody as the same. I want to see all my coworkers. I'm bringing them in. We're all one. And my thought is, what is that one? What's our default color? Well, this is the flesh color Band-Aid. At least Band-Aid now has woken up enough to realize, hey, we need some darker color Band-Aids. Now, they still may have a ways to go and get darker color people, maybe on their boards. But it's a step in the right direction. We don't need to be colorblind. And I love where you said, well, what would you do at a stoplight? Like, we see the color. And it not to take away from people who may actually have the ailment, but it's a term that's well intended to see, well, I see all people or I treat all people the same, but it really nullifies or strips me of what I am. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, I think that's very important. And it goes back into racist ideology. And I know we define race. We may all know that racist or racism is the thinking that one race is superior to another. Mm-hmm. And the definition of racism even changed. I think it was a Black female student named Kennedy who emailed Merriam-Webster and got it to include systems of power. Mm-hmm. So that's where you have people say, well, this is reverse racism. And if I'm doing something and I'm, as a man, I'm in the dominant group to a woman, it's like, well, if she inflicts pain on me in some way, and I'm like, well, that's reverse sexism. It's like, well, would she really have the power, or would a trans person have the power to be sexist toward me when I have the majority of people in power that look like or identify like me?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've always liked that. We joked about that when Phillip and I were talking before, that, when people say they're colorblind, like, I always want to ask them, well, what do you do at a stoplight? Like, what do you do then? Like, you obviously see color. So the objective is not for us to not see color, but rather to recognize it for what it is. And we're going to talk about this later, ultimately to celebrate it, and not just, to celebrate all people, all people, all backgrounds. And so I think that's why, Phillip, what you said a moment ago about how racism has to a certain degree stripped ethnicity, that's the problem. You have, imagine if Irish people can't celebrate their cultural heritage, Italian people can't celebrate their cultural heritage, if they were stripped of that, German culture, whatever it might be, That is essentially part of the problem, of the root issue for African Americans here, is we've had to create a completely new culture here because our history in a lot of ways was stripped through slavery. But go ahead, you were about to say something else.
I love that you said being able to celebrate with people. And I think that's, if you look at the dichotomy, we need to be able to celebrate with people and we need to be able to mourn with people. And I think about what happened yesterday in Lebanon. And if I had a Lebanese coworker that I didn't get to know, or when they came in, I knew they were from some part of, I guess, what we refer to as the Middle East. But let's say I never quite asked them about their home because I didn't want them to feel like they weren't a part of the group. I didn't want them to feel like they were, as we say, otherized.
Yeah.
Well, now you have a situation where the explosion that many of you may have seen that was, tragic and scary to even watch. How could I imagine celebrating with a person if I can't mourn with a person? Were they impacted by this or not? But if I hadn't gotten to know them for who they are, or for where their affinity or family, where they have family ties, and I really stripped them of that, but I stripped myself of a relationship, even though it was well intended. I didn't want them to feel like they weren't a part of the group, so I never acknowledged their background. And then maybe they're not from Lebanon, maybe they're from Iraq or Syria, a surrounding country, but maybe I thought, well, I already think people are making them feel horrible post 9/11, so in my well-intended, kind mind, I'm just never going to bring that up. Well, then you missed the opportunity there. So it's better to kind of call it what it is and form relationships, and then from there get to learn about really our neighbors and people around us. Yeah.
I think the piece that you mentioned there that's so important is being willing to mourn and struggle with others. It reminds me, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, German theologian, most well known for his response in World War II to the Nazis. He was he fought against the Nazi movement in Germany, and there was a moment for him in the early 40s for him to leave Germany. And he actually went as far as England and then turned around. And when someone asked him why he was going back, he said, if I can't stand there in the middle of tragedy and of this moment of need, I can't be there when we win the war and celebrate later. And so, powerful thing. It reminds me of that. Well, we call this conversation a conversation on equity. And so we talked about like why we chose that specific word. And so, why not use the word equality? Why use this term equity? How do those two terms differ, and why is equity preferable?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I've gone to actually conferences where they've critiqued just terms you use for even offices. If you're on a college campus, you may see an office called the Office of Multicultural Services, Offices of Diversity, now the Office of Equity and Inclusion. So great examples that I've heard is equality versus equity. Equality is really giving everyone something equal. And people say it all the time, hey, I treat all people equal. And I'll tell you how that's problematic. If everybody on this call said, okay, we want to treat all people equal, everybody's going to get a pair of shoes. And they're going to be a size 8.5. Well, first of all, what system am I using to measure that size shoe? I may have someone who doesn't go by that size. Maybe they use a different metric system. Am I keeping that in mind? But does everybody wear an 8.5? Does everybody 8.5 feet? Is everybody able to walk? When we think of diversity, able-bodied people really forget about people who are physically unable or differently able or disabled, and then those invisible handicaps too. But equality is giving everyone the same. Equity is giving everyone what they need really to succeed or be successful. You may have seen a post where it has different height people trying to watch a ball game. Gave everybody the same platform. These few people could see and this person couldn't. Well, equity, you give everybody a different platform. Now everybody can see over the fence and see the ball game. And more so, it's like, why don't we remove the barrier of the fence? So then everybody's able to see. And I think that's a big part of Black Lives Matter. And to explain that, that's something that I take for granted. And I think, well, in my circle, everybody knows you're not saying Black lives only matter. You're saying Black lives matter too. And I don't mean two like number two, like, oh, all lives matter one, Black lives matter two. No, Black lives matter also. And it really results from, I mean, initially it started, we think about Black women, and we can talk about intersectionality at some point later, but they founded this group based on what happened to Trayvon Martin. And it was just like, you could kill a Black body and go have dinner with your family. And we've seen that recently. You can, live months, a nice life, have attorney-client privilege for months, preparing your case. You can do so much because, well, I was threatened by them. And regardless if you blame media or society for making Black males being threatening type bodies, but Black Lives Matter, you may see them, well, wait, they said they want equality. Or you may look at the back of an NBA jersey and see equality. You're like, wait, I thought they wanted equity. That's the thing. Not even asking for equity. We're just asking for equality. A lot of times with the Black Lives Matter movement is really just asking for the same treatment. Nothing extra, nothing less. Just the same treatment as unfortunately, someone just shot AK at all because they didn't want to wear a mask. It's still living. And it's not going to happen if this can't be much darker. So equality is wanted a lot of times, and then equity is needed a lot of times to make sure that people can succeed.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's excellent. So, in that light, one of the reasons we're having this conversation today is that, some of our white brothers and sisters, in response to, what happened with George Floyd, that's kind of presented this kind of new moment in our country, what feels like a new moment. I think a lot of us want it to be a new moment, and not just a moment in time, but a moment for change, right? And so with that being the case, a lot of them are asking, what can I personally do? What can we do? And you've heard this term ally used a lot. But even as we've had in our conversation, there's a difference between being an ally and being a leader. So talk about that for a minute.
That's a great question, and really even a great response in that question. Allyship it's a great thing. You can look throughout history. Dr. King had allies. You look at the Jewish community, and I know we're talking about race, and the Jewish community is a tricky one for a lot of people. Or is it a race? Is it a culture? Is it a religion? Or is it all of the above? But historically, looking at the marginalizations or the discriminations, Jewish had to go and had the opportunity to go to the great historically Black colleges and universities. So they were at our HBCUs with some of our Black scholars. They were hand in hand with Dr. King with marches for civil human rights, voting rights. A lot of Jewish students were in Mississippi even, and all throughout the South as a part of the Freedom Riders. I think that's really a true definition of allyship. And because they're Jewish, there is some privilege in that with the white skin. And even if you're Black, we talked about this concept of passing. And back in your generation, if you had very fair skin, you could pass. As white, you were privy or you were given more opportunities than probably your darker brothers or sisters. So when you think about A.J. Heschel, Rabbi, and some other people who have taken their privilege and utilized it to help a group to where ultimately, I think when you pull one group up, you pull all groups up, but it didn't directly benefit them. But the Jewish people have a slogan, never again. It's never again for our people or for your people or for their people or for white people. It's never again. And so I think that's true allyship and leading. People want to know what they can do. I think it starts with yourself. Mentor and friend Chris Collins always told me, research begins with me search. What is it with me that I need to learn? And the number one thing, what do I need to unlearn about what I've been taught? What do I need to unlearn about how I've been socialized? And we have links that will be provided on the cycle of socialization, just how we've been trained, even as Blacks, to fear, a Black male body, or to sexualize or exoticize the Latinx woman. And so it's allyship, I think, ultimately looks at taking your privilege, even as men, and speaking on behalf of or speaking up when necessary, and really asking what is needed from a group.
Yeah.
Look at, and with our faith backgrounds, we're no stranger to missionary trips. I know a lot of times we may go to Haiti, we may go to Africa, we may go to places, and I've been on a missionary trip where we took toothbrushes to this group. And I had my students, my white students, say, they didn't feel good. They didn't ask for toothbrushes. What do they need? What do they want? And then I took it to the superiors, and we kept those donated toothbrushes on the ship as we were traveling, because we can assume we know what someone needs and give that to them. Yeah, so true allyship doesn't look at just giving something of yourself. It's seeing what's needed, making sure you don't overstep any boundaries, and kind of being there, as we said, to celebrate and to mourn.
Yeah. And I think it's so important, to remember in that, the term ally, like most of us, when we hear that word, we actually think of, war, right? We think of the Allies, and again, in World War II or something of that sort. And I think that in some ways that's really appropriate, because it's about sacrifice. It's about being willing to sacrifice for the person that is your partner, for the person that is your comrade. Like, you're willing to go to whatever means it takes in order to fight for their freedom, to make sure that they have the things that they need. And you're willing to lead in that way. You brought this up, at the very beginning, when we were talking about race, and that there is, inherent in that term, this denotion of power, right? Or what we might say authority. So let's talk about the issue of authority, at least in our cultural context, for just a minute.
This is great, and when you think about the term positionality, it really just refers to kind of what position are you in. And people may say, well, Matthew, look at how successful you are. Look at the position you have. You made it, and you and I both know, because we know our families, you come from a legacy of people before you, or dead and alive, who have done and made some major sacrifices to really plant some roots and to provide a better life for those to come. And I'm grateful as well, for my mom and my grandmother, my dad and my aunt, just the education and them working in the healthcare system. It gave we use another term called habitus in higher ed, or the people who I know. I knew doctors, I knew lawyers growing up. I had access to these things. And so even if I'm not in a position, having access or a network of people who are in a position gives me a certain privilege.
Yeah.
And then when you think about authority, a lot of times it's positions of people in positions of authority, or people in positions of power. And I know we have young professionals on here, and I think it is to be celebrated when you have a diverse team with whom you work, or when you're recruiting for applicants and you say, look at the diversity that we brought in. But it's like, when you say, look at the diversity that we have brought in, who is the we? Who's bringing in? So people in positions of power, authority, influence, that's when I think you're truly even having diversity of thought. If you look at political positions, the same thing exists. You look at our current president, and you look at the interns, and look at the shades on their skin, and you can just think, well, who has an influence there? And some of this may be well intended. I hear about Billy Graham a lot. And they say, well, when he traveled, he stayed in the hotel by himself, and no women could be in the hotel, only men. And so what that did, I think, wow, that was great sacrifice and boundaries that he put in place that are necessary. But what that didn't give any women to be an understudy the same opportunities that they gave all the men around him.
Yeah.
Especially in religion, they can be very sexist. And of course, we know the Bible has been used as a tool of oppression in the wrong way. There's just like people in positions of authority and power that can go on for generations. Because you can't hire people who look like you, hire people with whom you feel comfortable, hire people who you know to replace or be in those positions where they have real authority and real power or real influence.
Yeah. And yeah, I think the religion piece is one of the toughest, because the Bible, it is a two-edged sword, and culturally it's been used, like you said, in so many negative ways, but at the same time, without the incredible images of powerful women in the Bible, we might not even have the culture that we have in America, right? Like, that's the weird thing about it, is that it goes both ways. The Bible is unlike any other ancient document in that it reflects these stories of these incredible women. But yet, at the same time, like in our modern context and in historical context, it still can be used to oppress women. That's one of the things I think that's so tricky about all of this, about this entire conversation. Even again, when we go back to this, what you mentioned about the Black Lives Matter, it can feel so subjective to people. This group on this side view it this one way, and this group on the other side view it completely different. And unfortunately, like you were saying a moment ago, too many times we don't do that hard work of introspection to kind of identify where we personally are first before we approach these terms, before we approach these issues and these ideas. And I think that is like a great segue for this next question, because I think that's a big part of what we see going on with this. What's the deal with cancel culture? What's going on with that? Like, that's everywhere right now. It's constantly, we're always hearing, about somebody being canceled. Honestly, sometimes rightly so. But then there are a lot of times where you're like, I don't know about that one. So what's going on with that?
Cancel culture, that's a great question. Social media, I think, in general, has had a huge impact on this time. Very positive and some negative impacts. But cancel culture, I guess I just have to come out. I totally understand and totally disagree with cancel culture. I think the good intentions for cancel culture are, for so long, these people on these platforms have made decisions, and they've had a voice and a platform, and they've used it recklessly. And so now it's like, we're going to cancel you via social media, or we're going to use social media to cancel your life. And so you have Karens, who is not synonymous with white women. Karen is a term for a person that utilizes their privilege in America to incite a violent situation with a false claim. Typically, you have it. They used to be barbecue Becky's, and there were people who were calling the police really for these very small situations that could have turned ugly, just based on interactions with police and people of color, especially police and Black communities. But social media has attempted to utilize the power in the voices, in the collective, and cancel a person. And it's saying like, hey, you no longer have your platform. We're going to cancel you either socially. We're no longer, you saw it happen to Nick Cannon. Like, what an ignorant statement on Jewish people. We're going to cancel you. How dare you? The audacity. Do you not know how great of allies? Do you not know the history of Jewish oppression? And the problem is, maybe he didn't know. And you think, well, he should have known. And he says he should have known. He comes back, apologizes. He says, hey, I want to use that same platform and bring on Jewish people. And the football players say, hey, I'm going to go to the Holocaust Museum and learn more about this culture that I didn't know. And cancel culture doesn't allow for that grace and the patience that we need if we want this to be a long-term, sustainable thing. But social media, what I do understand is cancel culture was an attempt to take the power away from people. So the woman who called the police on the bird watching Black man.
Right.
Yeah, it was, well, we'll counsel her, make sure she loses the dog that she almost killed, and make sure she loses her job. And it was really just because of the hurt and the pain. And it's a pile-on principle. That's what you have to understand. You say, okay, well, one time, but this is piled on so much now that we're seeing it. Will Smith said, we're not getting more racist. It's just becoming more recorded now what's happening. And we have a captive audience. Now that we're seeing it, we want to counsel people, but it doesn't allow for growth from those people. And it doesn't allow for us to really have patience and walk alongside. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't act. I think people do need to apologize. People do need to unlearn some of their thoughts. And I think personally, there does need to be a law against people who make false claims, especially based on race or religion in order to incite a situation. But cancel culture, don't cancel me socially, mute me, fine. We have the ability to hide me, but counseling somebody, I don't want my body to be canceled physically, nor do I want other bodies to be canceled virtually, because I think it's a learning process, and my faith tells me I can't do that.
Right.
Dissect, thou shalt not kill. It's not just kill physically. It's don't just kill, you're dead to me.
Yeah.
It won't allow me to do that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I remember the situation with the woman in Central Park, the bird watching incident. Someone posted this comment, and it really struck me. And this was why it was such a big deal, was that when she called the police on that black bird watcher, not was only his life in danger, every black man in Central Park that morning's life was in danger. Like, that's what our culture sometimes doesn't get about this issue of being a black male in America, is that you can feel that way. There's that fear. When we again, I was talking with somebody a week ago or so, and they were saying, I never knew, like, when we talk about having to talk with our kids, like, we talk about the birds and the bees. But I found out that when I talk with black families, when they talk about the talk, they having multiple talks, and one of those is about how you interact with law enforcement. And I think that's the challenge, again, one of the challenges in all of this. But I think the piece that you said is so important is that ultimately it's about grace. So Brian Stevenson, who Just Mercy, he wrote the book Just Mercy, but there's the movie out based on some of his experiences in his life. He is famous for saying that all of us are more than the worst thing we've ever done.
Yeah.
And like, that's such, like, that's the part that I wish more people in our culture would understand. Like, I'm a pastor, and I done some ugly stuff. Like, I done some wrong things, and like, everybody has. And like, nobody wants their bones like pulled out of the closet. And I think that's one of the challenging things about the internet, is that like, something is there forever. Like, it's never forgotten. It can always be dragged back out. And if we're so quick to cancel people, like, man, like, there's just no grace in that.
And
So go ahead. You got something.
To keep that local, even with Jackson, Tennessee, a moment I celebrated, and I was working out when I got this message from a friend, posted on Instagram, and they're a local Jackson, identifies as white woman, and her dad's a police officer. And I could recall, before Blue Lives Matter was big, before All Lives Matter, it was like Black Lives Matter. It was like, wait, Blue Lives Matter too, and All Lives Matter. I would have never thought of them as a Black Lives Matter type person.
Right.
And when I say that, I should also give the example for people who maybe didn't understand. If two houses were on fire in a neighborhood and the fire department came, you would say, wait, don't go to these houses. All houses need water. It's like, but these houses are on fire right now.
Yeah.
This person posted a picture, this daughter of an officer posted a picture of Ahmaud Arbery and said something to the effect of, this is a shame. And it was the picture when they were kind of wrestling over the gun. And I was like, what? I was like, hey, yeah, that's tragic. What are your thoughts on it? Because I didn't know if it was a shame, because some people could have thought, well, he should have listened, or he shouldn't have run, or he shouldn't have got in a tussle, or what was he doing running in the neighborhood? She said it's a shame that these aren't officers, even if you're a retired officer, that they didn't allow police to do their jobs.
Yeah.
And she said, I was just walking with my boyfriend, and we looked at a house that was for sale, and I didn't have to think twice about how I would be perceived if I looked at this house. So no matter what a person did, this is not what needs to happen. It's like, and I never had to think about that. And so for me, that was such a proud moment, because I was in LA and I had just recently been asked by some of my neighbors, did I belong in my neighborhood? And it brought out so many emotions in me. It brought out confusion, fear, anger. James Baldwin said it's a miracle that black men aren't in a rage every day. It brought out a arrogance in me. I wanted to give all my qualities, my worth. I wanted to talk about what I drive, where I live, what my family. I wanted to talk about all these things that aren't my nature, but I wanted to prove myself. It's like I wanted to do so much to belong, and I wanted to move away. I call my friends in Tennessee, friends in Florida, and they say, hey, it's not going to be any better. Like, this is something we have to live with. And so I went and talked with those people, and we worked through that, and I allowed them to grow. I initially thought once the HOA board, I was going to have her resign from her position. I was angry. Yeah. But also with Jackson, Tennessee, we have attorney and author and CNN analyst Van Jones, who we may know as Anthony Jones, who said a lot in his books and TED Talks with sustainability. Now, he's a Yale law graduate, and he said, well, yeah, we've come a long way with sustainability. We'll recycle a bottle, but when it comes to those who have served time, or those to whom we look at as the least of these in our nation, prison inmates, we won't recycle a body. He said, we've come a long way to where we'll hug this tree, realizing we need this tree in society for our breathing and for nature, but we won't hug a brown or a black body. And he said, until we can really treat people like we treat our environment, which needs to be taken care of, then we won't truly have any kind of justice, whether economic, environmental justice, or social justice. But I think we learn a lot from and people.
Yeah, and I'm thankful for you sharing that story, even for what you experienced personally, because I think that's one of the other all these challenges. That's one of the other challenges, is that we can talk about these issues, and I even have like college friends. I had a college friend like a month ago who I was doing the same thing, trying to have this conversation with, productively, and he was like, well, like that's stuff that used to happen, and I'm like, bruh, like, so I live in Jackson, Tennessee. When my family moved, like when my dad moved to the house that he lives in now, when we moved to North Jackson, we were we were only the second Black family to ever move in that neighborhood. Down the street from Pat Berry, who's on this call, she can testify to that. We were one of the only Black families in that neighborhood. He still is one of the only Black families in that neighborhood. And so, like, that, as much as things have changed, there are some things that are unfortunately still the same. And as you were mentioning just a moment ago, like, this struggle too with, how we allow for rehabilitation in our country and in our society. And that, as we transition now to talk about specifically, job market and things like that, like that has a massive influence on all those pieces. So, think about unemployment, which is an issue now, once again, because of this pandemic. African-American unemployment rates are typically double that for our Caucasian brothers and sisters. But African-American men in particular, who work full-time, typically earn only 72% of what Caucasian males do, and 85% of what Caucasian women do. And so, how does this reality shape the job market, and particularly prospects for men that look like you and me?
That's such a great question, and a great comment even before that, Matt. I love I don't love it, but I do get many people that say things aren't like that anymore. Look at you. Look at your brother. Look at where you live. Look at you, Matt. You got this position. And it reminded me yesterday, I was going through my mail, and I hate getting junk mail. I think it's one of the worst things, the physical mail you get. And I'm always quick to throw the newspapers away, quote unquote, recycle them, use them in any kind of way. But I always feel called to look at the missing persons section. And you'll see, they used to be in the post office, where you'll have a picture of a little girl. It may say Annie, last seen when she was 7 years old. And it'll have a picture to the right of Annie, and it'll say age progressed. And so if I saw Annie when she was 7, and if I go looking for that same face, I won't recognize her. But if I look at the age progressed picture, and it's amazing they can do that with technology. But okay, this is how Annie will look at 27, 20 years later. And now I know what to look for, and I can find that. And so I think many times in our society, we look at things like, well, people aren't saying the N-word anymore. They're not racist. It's like, well, age progressed. That may look like them saying thug, predator, super predator, or they come from crap hole countries. it'll look like that now, age progressed. People aren't doing yellow face in the media anymore, and Chinese people are graduating at high rates, and they have some of the smartest people in our nation at how they're graduating. That doesn't happen anymore. Okay, well, what does that look like age progressed? Maybe that looks like calling something like the Chinese virus or being tough on China, and the implications that can have on any Asian American who gets grouped as Chinese living in our country. Or, oh, well, immigrants, Latinx community have come a long way. They're running for president. They're no longer viewed as Hispanic, lazy immigrants, or they're usually viewed as just Mexicans, weed smoking that are coming over here illegally. It's like, but age progressed, that may look like a person in a high political position saying these people are coming over taking jobs, or rapists or robbers. So it's like things somewhat have still stayed the same. And that leads me to, I also think of the things that are like, we were protesting in Memphis, Dr. King with Garbage Man, and with signs that said, "I am a man."
I'm a man. Yeah.
So it can you could put a twin photo. It can look the same. Years later, we're protesting for those same things. Black lives matter. Black bodies matter. Police brutality. If you look at Google Black Panther Party for Defense, look at their 10-point plan. You'll realize they're not as radical as you probably thought before. You'll see, oh, they started the free breakfast program. Oh, they patrolled their own neighborhoods when stoplights ding. They were fighting against police brutality. Some of those same things now. And when you talk about unemployment, last year, Fox News even published this, men were unemployed, black men were unemployed over 11% in Memphis, Tennessee. And black women were up around 10%. And now you see the country is at an unemployment rate or fluctuating around 10 or 11%. And we are up in arms. We realize this needs a lot of attention. This needs federal funding. This needs resources. We need to open the economy back up. But it's like, where were you a year ago in all these years when this happened within a black community? Health-wise, we've been in a pandemic. We've been dying from different things for different reasons, lack of resources, lack of access to healthcare. So we need to really be anti-racist in a lot of our policies and thinking, and shift to a place to where we realize this has been a tragedy in black and brown, and people say BIPOC, black, indigenous, or BIPOC, people of color communities for a while. And unfortunately, it doesn't become a huge issue or get federal funding or attention until it affects the greater, or some may say even the white community. So unemployment, is definitely something we have to look at. And it's more than just recruiting people for positions. It's making sure people are equipped, making sure people have the resources, the education opportunities for those positions.
Yeah. Well, we got about 7 minutes left, so I know we're not going to be able to get through all of the questions, but there are a couple more that I want to ask really quick, and they're kind of related. Number one, what can we do to make the job market more equitable based, off everything you just said? And then, I mentioned this at the top, what can we do to not only recognize diversity, but actually celebrate it in the workplace?
Yeah, those are good questions. And to make the job market more equitable, and a lot of things are tough right now, of course, during a pandemic, but I think in the past, one of my best friends from Martin, Tennessee, Dr. Bright, said we were all told as black men, education is the key to success.
Yep.
And he now works with this group, 5,000 role models, of mentoring, school students. And while he still believes education is important, he said, we all went out and got educations. He said, and we took out great numbers of loans sometimes. We have education and we have debt. He said, we were told education is the key. Education is the key. He said, now we walk around with a lot of keys, but they don't fit into any of the locks. And that stuck with me. And it did, because it's not just education. Because sometimes maybe we need a gap year. And I work in higher education. Some people aren't ready. You send a student to University of Tennessee at Knoxville, are they ready for that? Oh, you think Knoxville, UT Knox is a diverse, great place, but what about the community around them? When they're traveling back, are you if they stop at a gas station, do you think they'll feel safe? Do they have teachers or other peers that look like them? Do they have administrators that look like them? Research shows that you're more successful when you have teachers, faculty, administration who look like you.
Yeah.
So when you think about diversifying the workplace, it's hard to do because you want to hire the best person. Well, how can you equip people to be the best people? And so they have a really big focus at Dr. Bright's organization on STEM, because as you look at technology, science, technology, engineering, and math majors and studies, people graduating with that don't have a problem in entering the workplace. I think you have to look at equipping people for the workplace. The lottery scholarship is probably a great thing, but our community college is better for some people. Instead of going to a 4-year school, if they just want an associate's degree or a trade, now we realize the importance of essential workers. And if we're still low on associate degrees, then what barriers exist from people even getting there? So I think in order to diversify the workplace, we have to equip people to be able to do it, and also bring people in positions who have authority and who are doing the hiring. And I think that's a good way to start.
I think that, you know, so many things that you said there, you know, hit right on, because I think all of our people have, you know, every single one of us, black, brown, you know, white, whatever, you've all been taught part of the American dream is education. And the reality is that education alone doesn't solve all of our problems. Like you said, we have to actually have access. There have to be people there to actually, if we don't have the key to the door, there has to be somebody else there to open it for us. And you know, 75% of us have the job we do right now because somebody recommended us. You know, so building that network of people, diversifying our friend groups, diversifying our workplace groups, all of those pieces, you know, seems so important, so that we can see more of that diversity reflected, you know, in the places that we work. But also, you know, we talked about the religion piece in the places that we worship. You know, MLK and James Baldwin and so many others said 60 60 years ago, you know, Sunday morning is still segregated. For many of us, Sunday morning is more segregated than the place we work. The place that we work is more integrated than some of the places we worship. And so, you know, there's so many walls to knock down. Well, I know that we, again, can't get to everything. Who knows? Maybe we'll get to do this again. But brother, it's been good to spend this time with you. I hope that, you know, this conversation has been beneficial for everybody on. I'm going to turn it back over to AJ so he can wrap us up.
Okay, and if I should chime in one quick thing, celebrating how we celebrate the diversity, make sure we're in a position to celebrate it. And I say celebrate with the people. I can remember people celebrating me in an environment that I didn't even feel comfortable being there. So as you recruit people, make sure you have the tools or the environment that will retain them. And if you don't do the surprise celebration, bring them into the how would you want to be celebrated? It's one thing to speak for people not at the table, and when you plan something for someone, getting their input is very important. I think we should also celebrate how far we've come, because I think that'll make the journey sustainable. We have a lot of unlearning to do, but I think together we can really do it.
Hey guys, Matt, Phillip, really appreciate you guys. And I hope this isn't oversimplifying it, but I think the conversations like this is what's going to change this community and obviously our nation and the world. Have these conversations with your kids and with your neighbors and with your friends and with your coworkers, and keeping those lines of communications, bringing the light to expose the dark. So I appreciate that, guys. I want to thank you so much once again for joining us today. I want to thank our sponsors for JYP. Again, is Gerdau, Alexander Thompson and Arnold CPAs, Simmons Bank, Voya Financial, Steve and Brad Little, Personnel Placements LLC, and Align. You guys keep a lookout on social media, on the Jackson Chamber social media for our next event. And Matt,